Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're gonna introduce our study on indigenous literacy learning. We are group 4 and our group member is Amy, Meg, Abby, and Shasha. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We express our gratitude to the Coquitlam people who continue to live on the care for this land along with the water and all that is above and below. Today, we will discuss the challenge indigenous children face in the literacy. Why this research is important, the research method used in our study, and how this finding can be applied in education. Indigenous children often face a significant challenge in the literacy learning. Studies show that their reading and writing skills tend to lag behind the non-indigenous children. In British Columbia, over 40% of indigenous children failed the province-wide reading test. Similarly, in New Zealand, Maori and Pacifica students had the lowest literacy rate among ethnic groups. One of the main reasons for this gap is that the way literacy traditionally taught in indigenous community differ from how it is taught in school. Indigenous children often learn oral storytelling, cultural tradition and community-based learning. However, most school literacy programs focus on reading and writing and standards assessment. Because of this, many indigenous students struggle to engage with formal literacy introduction, leading to lower motivation and academic performance. This gap in literacy achievement not only impacts their education but also has long-term impact on their school and economy opportunity. And as mentioned earlier, indigenous children face significant challenge in literacy, leading to large achievement gap compared to non-indigenous students. In British Columbia, over 40% of indigenous children fail reading assessment, while non-indigenous students perform significantly better. This gap is not just about learning ability, but stems from differences in educational approaches. Indigenous community emphasize storytelling, land-based learning, and community centers education, while school focus on reading, writing, standardizing assessment. Because of this, many indigenous students struggle to engage in school literacy program. However, in incorporating indigenous literacy practice into school can help children feel more connected to their learning and improvement engagement. Using storytelling and nature-based learning can make the literacy education more familiar and meaningful for them. This study explores how indigenous literacy practice can be applied in early childhood education to reduce the literacy gap and create a more inclusive learning environment. To better understand how indigenous children develop literacy, This study used qualitative research method. Researchers conduct focus group discussion with indigenous family, include parents, grandparents, and caregiver. These discussions provide insight into how literacy taught and practiced at home. Interviews are also conducted with educators and community leaders to explore indigenous teaching strategies and how they can be integrative into formal schooling. Educators share their experience in supporting indigenous students and discuss effective approaches for incorporating indigenous literacy practice into school environment. By gathering a perspective from families and educators and community members, this study provides the deeper understanding of indigenous literacy practice and opportunities to bridge a school education with home learning. And Meg will explain next part. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I'm Meg. Now I'm gonna introduce theoretical framework indigenous knowledge on this slide. Indigenous knowledge is local and culturally specific and changes over time and place. It includes practices, values, beliefs, and worldviews, and is recognized as a complete knowledge system with its philosophy and logic. This knowledge system emphasizes holistic learning, connecting all aspects of life through storytelling, land-based learning, and community practices. Indigenous knowledge offers a powerful framework for supporting early literacy development and fostering a strong cultural identity. How do indigenous children engage in literacy practices? Stories were the main way to share cultural knowledge. They were used to teach, entertain, set example of good behavior, and give warnings. Through ceremonies and repetition, stories preserve a people's history. Songs and dances are important ways to pass down history, traditions, and beliefs. They help keep cultural knowledge alive and connect people to their heritage. Indigenous languages and symbols shape how knowledge is understood and shared. They provide structure to indigenous knowledge system and help explain the world and its relationships. Indigenous knowledge values connections between people and the natural world. It's closely linked to the land. Land and community are sources of knowledge shaped through relationships and experiences. So indigenous children learn through land, ceremonies, oral traditions, and community. Literacy develops through relationships with nature and land-based experiences. Geography and the environment have cultural meanings shared through stories and dance. Indigenous literacy is beyond written text, incorporating land, ceremonies, and oral traditions. AHSOR is Aboriginal Head Start on Reserve program. This is an Aboriginal early childhood intervention program based on the US Head Start model. It's available in over 350 First Nations reserve communities across Canada. First Nations children experience ancestral language and cultural heritage supporting literacy. The program connects knowledge from the land, ceremonies, and elders to the curriculum. early childhood programs can help children and families from different backgrounds get used to school literacy. Some children in Aboriginal Head Start programs kept their reading and language skills up to grade 5. Quality early childhood programs benefit Indigenous children by improving intellectual, social, and economic outcomes. Role of educators and caregivers. Schools should recognize Indigenous knowledge as valid and important. This knowledge must be respected to help children and families, especially those from diverse backgrounds, connect their home and community literacy with school learning. Educators must build relationships with Indigenous families and understand their goals. Special outreach and community engagement are also essential. Learning about oral storytelling and outdoor education supports diverse literacy skills. Next presenter is Abby. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I will be discussing the importance of respecting Indigenous knowledge and education and its benefits to children and communities. Indigenous literacy, cultural expressions, and traditional teachings play a vital role in shaping well-rounded and inclusive learning environments. The first one is Indigenous literacy should be valued and integrated into schools. Indigenous literacy includes oral traditions, storytelling, language, and unique ways of understanding the world. These teachings have been passed down for generations and should be valued in schools. By integrating Indigenous perspectives into the curriculum, we acknowledge and honor the knowledge systems that have sustained communities for thousands of years. Next would be early childhood education must include Indigenous knowledge and cultural expressions. It is crucial to introduce the Indigenous knowledge at an early age. Young children benefit from learning through Indigenous storytelling, art, songs, and land-based education. These methods help develop creativity, problem-solving skills, and a deep respect for nature and culture. And the last one, what would be the benefits for students or for the children and the communities? By incorporating Indigenous knowledge into education, it helps children succeed while preserving important traditions. It promotes cultural pride among Indigenous students and educates all learners about the rich histories and contributions of Indigenous peoples. This approach strengthens connections between schools and Indigenous communities, creating more inclusive and respectful society. While education is essential for all children, Indigenous students often face unique barriers that impact in their learning experiences and success. The first one is historical barrier. One major challenge is the historical impact of past educational policies. Many Indigenous communities experience forced assimilation through residential schools, leading to deep mistrust in mainstream education. This history has resulted in resistance to formal schooling, affecting literacy development across generations. Next would be a cultural mismatch. In schools, traditional literacy teaching methods often ignore Indigenous ways of learning, such as like storytelling, land-based education, and community teachings. When children do not see their culture reflected in their education, engagement, and motivation can suffer. And the last one is curriculum representation. Many textbooks and lesson plans exclude Indigenous histories, languages, and contributions.
This not only undermines Indigenous students' sense of identity, but also limits opportunities for all children, to students, to learn about Indigenous perspectives. Next would be about the bridging Indigenous knowledge and school literacy. May I call in my group mate Sasha to discuss this presentation.
Thank you, Abby. While there are many challenges to Indigenous literature development, these issues are not insurmountable. Through cultural relevant pedagogy, community collaborations, and flexible curriculum designs, we can create a more inclusive learning environment that promotes literacy development among Indigenous students. Specifically, incorporating Indigenous narratives and teaching methods enhance relatively fostering deeper engagement in literacy learning, engagement with Indigenous elders and families, enriches educational practice through shared cultural knowledge and experience. Adopting curriculum to reflect Indigenous histories and perspectives ensures inclusivity and validates student identities. Through these approaches, Indigenous knowledge can be effectively integrated into school literacy systems to help students overcome existing educational barriers. Now, I'll introduce some specific Indigenous literacy books that play a vital role in language learning. While also covering the wisdom and values of Indigenous culture in different ways. First book, Discovering Numbers. This Indigenous literacy book Discovering Numbers and a pronunciation guide to French and Cree words. We can learn numbers in Cree with bright, colorful letters and pictures. This book will educate and entertain preschoolers, parents, and teachers alike. Next, Anisha Beymer Alphabet. This Indigenous literacy book is filled with attractively shaded illustrations, Anisha Beymer words, and their English translations, and it can be used by students, parents, and teachers, young and old. It's written in a double vowel writing system and is intended to show the sequence of the Obibowe alphabet. Sorry. And next, Circle of Love. In this warm-hearted book highlights the importance of love, inclusion, and Indigenous traditions, emphasizing how intertribal community centers help preserve culture and create expanded families. Through heartfelt storytelling and vibrant artwork, the book celebrates love, belongings, and the warmth of community. And the last book, We Learn from the Sun. This Indigenous literacy book shares the wisdom of the sun through beautiful illustrations and poetic storytelling. It teaches readers about the importance of respecting nature, living in balance with the world, and learning from traditional indigenous knowledge. The book is designed for students, parents, and teachers, offering valuable lessons for all ages. Thank you. These books about are just a few of many indigenous literacy resources. They demonstrate the unique value and far-reaching influence of indigenous knowledge in modern education. Thank you.
Next would be, what would be the role of community and elders in Indigenous literacy? The community and elders play a vital role in Indigenous literacy development. Their knowledge, guidance, and language preservation efforts help shape meaningful learning experiences. First, elders as knowledge keepers. Elders pass down cultural narratives and traditions through storytelling, strengthening language skills and cultural identity. Next, intergenerational learning. Community involvement connects generations, allowing children to learn from diverse cultural perspectives and experiences. And the third one, language preservation efforts. By working together, communities ensure indigenous languages are maintained and integrated into literacy practices for future generations. And by honoring the role of elders and community in education, it strengthens indigenous literacy and preserves traditions, as well as supports lifelong learning for children as well as for the educators. And what would be the implications for education policy? First, to support the indigenous literacy and learning, education policies must be inclusive and culturally responsive. There are three key areas of focus that are culturally responsive policies: the teacher training programs and collaborative educational frameworks. So first, culturally responsive policies. Education policies should integrate indigenous perspective, languages, and teaching methods. Schools must work with indigenous communities to ensure that they are reflecting the proper curricula, reflecting their histories, traditions, and ways of learning. Next, teacher training programs. Teachers need specialized training to understand indigenous cultures, languages, and learning styles. Culturally informed educators can create inclusive classrooms that support indigenous students' success. And the last one, collaborative educational frameworks. By partnership between schools, indigenous communities, and policymakers are essential. Collaboration ensures that indigenous voices shape the education system and leading to more effective and meaningful learning experiences. And by implementing these culturally responsive policies, improving teaching training, and fostering collaboration, we can build an education system that respects and empowers indigenous learners. Last one would be our conclusion for this presentation. In conclusion, integrating indigenous literacy practices into education leads to significant benefits. First, enhance educational outcomes. When indigenous storytelling and learning methods are embraced, children, students, educators show greater engagement, and also learners will show engagement in academic success. Second, recognition of indigenous traditions, honoring traditional storytelling and land-based learning strengthens children's cultural identity and understanding. And the last one, finally, community involvement. by active participation of Indigenous families and elders in education, it creates a richer, more meaningful literacy experience. And by valuing these practices, we support inclusive, effective learning environments for all children. This would be our references and acknowledgement for this presentation. Thank you so much for listening and good afternoon. Aside from the Indigenous literacy books that we have shared a while ago, we also want to show you some books that we have found in the library that you can also use to show it to your children, to your students, as well as to your friends, and for them to read these literacy books. We have I Am Rock by Ashley Kilabag Savard, Diamond Willow Walking Stick. These are all examples of Indigenous literacy books. Here. You can definitely use this to teach children about Indigenous literacies. Again, thank you so much and good afternoon, everyone.